Okay, today we are going to read through chapter 4 of Daivd Copperfield by Chrales Dicken. It's not just going to be a straight read through. We're going to read each sentence, and then if we find interesting vocabulary or phrases, we will talk about it or try to make this sentence or paragraph into simpler terms. So no matter what your level, it will be easier for you to understand. So, let's get started with chapter 4 of Daivd Copperfield. Chapter 4. I fall into disgrace. Now, I think that disgrace is a synonym of shame, in a way. So, but also maybe it means unlucky or bad luck here. I'm not sure. I already know the story. I've already been through the book many times. But I think that word disgrace now means shame. I wonder if it only meant shame 150 years ago. No, 170 years ago when this was written. Maybe it had a slightly different meaning. I'm not sure. But let's see. Let's go on. If the room to which my bed was removed were a sentient thing, sentient means it could feel or it could think, that could give evidence, I might appeal to it at this day. Who sleeps there now, I wonder, to bear witness for me what a heavy heart I carried to it. Okay, so he's saying that if his bed could talk or could communicate, that's the sentient part, he would ask it to give evidence, to tell a story, to confirm his story. And he's wondering who sleeps in that bed now. To bear witness for me, what a heavy heart I carried to it. So maybe he was crying in his bed. And if his bed could talk or think or communicate, it would agree. It would say, yeah, that happened. Okay, I went up there, hearing the dog in the yard bark after me. All the while, I climbed the stairs and, looking blank and strange upon the room as the room looked upon me, sat down with my small hands crossed and thought. I thought of the oddest things, of the shape of the room, of the cracks in the ceiling, of the paper on the wall, of the flaws in the window glass. Flaws are like little mistakes or imperfections. So he could see the flaws in the window. Old glass isn't like modern glass, so it's very smooth. It has little bumps and things like that. So, and ripples. Let's see if we can find something with ripples here. Okay. Ripples. Wait, I should put that word up here. Oh, it's been a few days. It's been a week, I think, since I've done one of these. I don't remember how to put text up here. Where can I put my text? Oh no. Let me see. Okay, here, we can put it here. Okay, ripples. Whoops. Here's the word, ripples. So he's talking about ripples in the window. And windows, old windows, are not perfect like modern windows. They had little lines. So let's take a look at what a ripple means. And maybe if you've ever seen old glass, you'll say, oh, okay, I understand what that is. Let's see. So these are ripples in the water. Ripples. So in old glass, in old style glass, you can see that sort of thing. Oops. Gosh, I don't do this for 1 week and then I forget how to do everything. Okay. Let's just close these windows. Okay. So let's see. Where are the ripples? I thought of the... Oh, wait. And looking at the blank, strange... Wait. I went up there hearing the dog in the yard bark after me. All the while I climbed the stairs and looking as blank and strange upon the room as the room upon me, sat down with my small hands crossed in thought. I thought of the oddest things, of the shape of the room, of the cracks in the ceiling, of the paper on the wall, of the flaws in the window glass making ripples and dimples. Oh, okay, we've got to do dimples too. Let me put that up here. Whoops, that's not right. How do I close that? Will I ever learn? Maybe not. Dimples. Dimples are, let me show you a picture of dimples. Dimples are like little holes like this. This is a dimple. I've got dimples. Some people don't. I have them. You can see my dimples. Those are dimples. So you can imagine in a window, you know, modern windows are very smooth, but old windows might have little dimples in them. Okay. So those are dimples. On the prospect of the washing stand being rickety. Rickety means like maybe unstable. So if something is rickety, like if you have a rickety table and you push it, it will move. It will move a little bit. So a rickety wash stand, that's, you know, before 170 years ago, they didn't have bathrooms. But they would have a place where you could maybe wash your face or something like that, and that was a wash stand. And it was rickety, meaning it wasn't very good quality, and if you touched it, it would move a little bit. So that's a rickety old wash stand. Of the washing stand being rickety on its 3 legs and having discontented something about it. And having a discontented something about it, which reminded me of Mrs. Gummidge under the influence of the old one. What does that mean? Under the influence of the old one. I'm not sure what he means by the old one here. I was crying all the time, but except that I was conscious of being cold and dejected. Dejected kind of means sad. Uh-oh. I've suddenly become blurry. Sad or hopeless or something like that. That's kind of what dejected means. Oh, let me fix my camera. Here we go. Okay. Well, actually, let's put that word up here. Dejected. Dejected. And I'm just going to search a definition here. Let's see. Dejected. Sad or depressed or dispirited, kind of hopeless. Yeah, that's what Google says. Kind of sad or depressed or something like that. So he's in a very bad state. Okay. I was crying all the time, but except that I was conscious of being cold and dejected, I'm sure I never thought why I cried. At last, in my desolation, I began to consider that I was dreadfully in love with little Emily, and had been torn away from her to come here where no one seemed to want me. To tear away I don't think we can stop for all of these. There's so much vocabulary in here. We'll never get done if I keep stopping. I'm going to have to. Well, if anyone's ever watching this, ask questions, and that's when I would know when to when to stop. But since there's nobody here, I don't know when to stop, and I'm just stopping when I find something interesting. And tear away is a phrasal verb. Now you know that tear is something like this. If you have some paper and you go like this is tearing paper. But tear away is when you separate two things. It's very difficult to separate two things. So how did he use tear away here? Let's see. I was dreadfully in love with Emily and had been torn away from her to come here. So he didn't want to leave. He was holding on to Emily, and they separated him, and it was very difficult to separate them because they didn't want to be separated, and that's tear away. Okay, I was dreadfully in love with Emily and had been torn away from her to come here where no one seemed to want me or care about me half as much as she did. This made such a very miserable piece of business of it that I rolled myself up in a corner of the counterpane and cried myself to sleep. I was awoke by somebody saying, "Here he is," and uncovering my hot head. My mother and Peggotty had come to look for me, and it was one of them who had done it. "Davy," said my mother, "what's the matter?" I thought it very strange that she should ask me and answered nothing. I turned over my face, I recollect, to hide my trembling lip. I think we've had that word trembling before. It means moving little short, fast movements like this. So if you have a trembling lip, it would be something like, maybe somebody trying not to cry, trying to hold in their crying. So his lip was trembling, which answered her with greater truth. So he said nothing, but you could see that he was about ready to cry because his lip was trembling. So that was obvious that he was lying when he said nothing. "Davy," said my mother, "Davy, my child, I dare say no words she could have uttered would have affected me so much than her calling me my child." I hid my tears in the bedclothes, and I pressed her from me with my hand when she would have raised me up. "This is your doing, Peggotty, you cruel thing," said my mother. "I have no doubt at all about it. How can you reconcile it to your conscience, I wonder, to prejudice my own boy against me, against anybody who is dear to me? What do you mean by it, Peggotty?" So the mother thinks that Davy's upset. He doesn't want to be there anymore. He prefers Peggotty's house. He prefers that boat that he was at. So she's blaming Peggotty and saying, "You were too nice to him, and now he doesn't like his own home. He doesn't want to be here anymore." Poor Peggotty lifted up her hands and eyes and only answered in a sort of paraphrase of the grace I usually repeated after dinner. Grace is a prayer that you say usually before dinner. So in the past, and sometimes now, depending on people, they would have a little prayer. "Thank you, God, for this food." And that's saying grace. But he would say grace after dinner. So Peggotty answered with a kind of prayer, in a way, sort of like Davy's prayer, usually. Let's see. Poor Peggotty lifted up her hands and eyes and only answered in a sort of paraphrase of the grace I usually repeated after dinner. "Lord, forgive you, Mrs. Copperfield, and for what you have said this minute. May you never truly be sorry." So she's saying, how can you... This is a very nice way of saying, how can you say such a thing? So she's saying, "Lord, forgive you, Mrs. Copperfield, for what you have said this minute. May you never be truly sorry. You could never understand how much you've just hurt me." "It's enough to distract me," cried my mother. "In my honeymoon, too, when my most inveterate enemy might relent, one would think. Not so even my worst enemy wouldn't be mean to me, wouldn't do bad things to me in this happy time, in this time when I'm supposed to be happy. But you did. You made my son not like it here anymore. Okay, so let's see. And not envy a little peace of mind and happiness. Davy, you naughty boy, Peggotty, you savage creature, oh dear me, cried my mother, turning from one of us to the other, in her pettish, wilful manner. What a troublesome world this is, when one has the most right to expect it to be as agreeable as possible. So she's, that's kind of a fancy way of saying things are supposed to be really good right now, and yet everything is horrible because of the way that you're acting. Let's see. I felt the touch of a hand that I knew was neither hers nor Peggotty's, and slipped to my feet at the bedside. It was Mr. Murdstone's hand. And he kept it on my arm as he said, "What's this? Clara, my love, have you forgotten? Firmness, my dear." Now, firmness means, in a way, it kind of means being strong. So what he's saying is, you're being too soft with Davy. You shouldn't let him cry or have feelings or something like that. He's saying you have to be very strong with this child, not soft. Firm. Firm means, in a way, strong. It kind of means like not moving, really. I mean, really, firm means it doesn't really move, or it's not. It's the opposite of soft, really. Well, hard is the opposite of soft, but firm is similar to hard. "I'm very sorry, Edward," said my mother. "I meant to be very good, but I'm so uncomfortable." "Indeed," he answered, "that's a bad hearing so soon, Clara." "I say it's very hard I should be made so now," returned my mother, pouting. Pouting is this. So if you're pouting, that's a good word. Let's put that up there. Pouting. Then we'll find a picture of it, because I don't know if my face really shows what pouting is. Oh, and there goes my camera again. Let's see. There we go. Pouting. Let's find a picture of pouting. So this is a pretty good picture of pouting. That's pouting. So the mother's complaining, and she's also pouting. She's showing a very sad, unhappy face. Whoops. That's not the right thing. I think that's my shopping list. Wait a minute. Okay, pouting. Okay, I say it's very hard I should be made so now. So she's saying, how can I be firm with him? How can I be hard with him? He's just come home. It's too early, returned my mother, pouting. And it's very hard, isn't it? He drew her to him. So to draw something is to bring it near. So he drew her to him and whispered in her ear and kissed her. I knew as well when I was my mother's head, when I saw my mother's head lean down upon his shoulder. This is the shoulder right here. So her head was on his shoulder like this. And her arm touched his cheek. This is the cheek right here. I knew as well that he could mold her pliant nature into any form he chose. And as I know that he did it. Okay, so to mold something is to make it into a special shape, into whatever shape you want. And something that's pliable or pliant means it's easy. It's easy to make a shape. So let's see. Let's find something here. Can we find a picture? Okay, this is clay. You take it, it's solid, but you can shape it. You can make it any shape you want. you can mold it, and it's pliable. It's easy to make a shape with it. So he's saying that the new husband is molding her. He's changing her shape, her form, her personality, and she's very pliable, which means it's easy for him to do it. She has a pliable nature. Okay, let's wait a minute. I got too many windows open and I'm getting confused. All right. Now what happened? Go below, my love, said Mr. Murdstone. So I think that's a way of saying go downstairs. Get out of the room. Go away, said Mr. Murdstone. David and I will come down together, my friend, turning a darkening face on Peggotty, when he had watched my mother out, and dismissed her with a nod, nodding as this, and a smile. Do you know your mistress's name? She has been my mistress a long time, sir, answered Peggotty. I ought to it. I ought to know it. I should know it. That's true, he answered. But I thought I heard, as I came upstairs, I thought I heard you, as I came upstairs, address her by the name that is not hers. She has taken mine, you know. Will you remember that? So maybe he was calling her Mrs. Copperfield instead of Mrs. Murdstone, and he didn't like that. Peggotty, with some uneasy glances, so uneasy means like uncomfortable, and glances means looks, so maybe, something like that, a little uncomfortable look at him. But Peggotty, with some uneasy glances at me, curtsied, and curtsy is kind of a bow for women, herself out of the room without replying, seeing, I suppose, that she was expected to go and had no excuse for remaining. When we two were left alone, he shut the door and, sitting on a chair and holding me standing before him, looked steadily into my eyes. So he looked directly into my eyes without moving, steadily. I felt my own attracted no less steadily to his. As I recall our being opposed thus, face to face, I seem again to hear my heart beat fast and high. David, he said, making his lips thin by pressing them together. If I have an obstinate horse, obstinate means stubborn, like doesn't listen, doesn't do what it's told, or dog to deal with. Oh, maybe obstinate is a word that we should put up here. Obstinate. Whoops. Obstinate. Well, here it says obstinate. Why do I think that it's obstinate? Now I have to check. Obstinate. Yeah, I think maybe that's just two. What if I do obstinate? Is it the same thing? It's just two ways of saying the same thing. Well, actually, if I put obstinate, it takes me to obstinate. So maybe this is like an older way of saying obstinate. Now we say obstinate, but in the past it was obstinate. But obstinate means doesn't listen or doesn't follow, is stubborn. I don't know if you know that word, but I think a good way of thinking is doesn't listen to instructions, doesn't follow directions. Is maybe so. If you have a horse or a dog and it doesn't listen, it doesn't follow directions. Let's see, what does he do? If I have an obstinate horse or dog to deal with, what do you think I do? And Davy says, I don't know. And Mr. Murdstone says, I beat him. I beat him. I had answered in a kind of breathless whisper, but I felt in my silence that my breath was shorter now. I make him wince and smart. Wince is like this. And smart means feeling pain. I know that you think smart means intelligent, but it also could mean feeling pain. So I make him wince and smart. I say to myself, I'll conquer that fellow. And if it were to cost him all the blood he had, I should do it. What is that upon your face? Dirt? Dirt, I said. I knew it was the mark of tears as well as I. He knew it was the mark of tears as well as I. But if he had asked the question 20 times, each time with 20 blows, I believe my baby heart would have burst before I would have told him so. You have a good deal of intelligence for a little fellow, he said, with a grave smile that belonged to him. And if you understood me very well, and you understood me very well, I see, wash that face, sir, and come down with me. He pointed to the washing stand, remember the rickety washing stand, which I had made out to be like Mrs. Gummidge, and motioned. So he's comparing the washing stand to Mrs. Gummidge. So maybe it's like an old, ugly, unstable thing. And motioned me with his head to obey him directly. I had little doubt then, and I have less doubt now, that he would have knocked me down without the least compunction if I had hesitated. So he's saying, I did it. I went and I washed my face right away because I knew if I didn't, he would hurt me. He would beat me like the horse or the dog. Clara, my dear, when I had done his bidding, bidding is a way of, it's kind of like asking. So to do someone's bidding is to do what they request, to do what they ask. Clara, he said, when I had done his bidding, so when I had washed my face like he asked me, and he walked into the parlor with his hand still on my arm, you will not be made uncomfortable any more, I hope. We shall soon improve our youthful humors. Now, maybe you know humor as meaning funny, but humor could just mean like mood or how you feel. So we shall soon improve our youthful humor. So I don't know why he's saying youthful. I think they're pretty old now. Davy's like, what, 10 or something like that? So, I mean, the mother's got to be like 30 or 35. And I think Mr. Murdstone is older than that. But maybe our I don't know. Let's just say moods. We'll improve our moods. God help me. I might have improved for my whole life. I might have been made another creature, perhaps, for life by a kind of word at that season, a word of encouragement and explanation, of pity for my childish ignorance, of welcome home, of reassurance to me that it was home, might have made me dutiful to him in my heart henceforth. So he's saying he felt really uncomfortable and not welcome there. But if he had felt welcome, if they had been nicer to him, maybe he would have reacted differently. Let's see. I keep losing my spot. A reassurance to me that it was home might have made me dutiful to him in my heart henceforth, instead of in my hypocritical outside, and might have made me respect instead of hate him. So all he had to do was be a little bit kind, a little bit nice, a little bit more respectful, and Davy would have been reacting very differently to this situation. I thought my mother was sorry to see me standing in the room, so scared and strange, and that presently when I stole to a chair, she followed me with her eyes more sorrowfully still, missing perhaps some freedom in my childish tread. Tread is walking. So the way that he was walking, I guess, made his mother feel very sad. But the word was not spoken, and the time for it was gone. So he's saying it's too late. Nobody can say or do anything to make me feel better about this situation, ever. We dined alone, we three together. He seemed to be very fond of my mother. Now, fond, it's a word we've done before in other things, not in this book. To be fond of something, but it's worth mentioning, to be fond of something. Let's put that up here. This is a kind of a nice way of saying that you like something. So if you say I am fond of something, that means I like it. And because it's a very nice way of saying like, it's used very frequently in the negative. I'm not fond of something because that sounds nicer than I don't like. Just because being fond of something, it's more elevated language. So if you don't like something, instead of saying I don't like it, you say I'm not fond of it. And that sounds much nicer, to be fond of something. Here we're using it in the affirmative. Uh, she was very fond of him. She liked him very much. I gathered from what they said that an elder sister of his was coming to stay with them, and that she was expected that evening. I'm not certain whether I found out then or afterwards that without being actively concerned in any business he had some share in, or some annual charge upon the profits of, a wine merchant's house in London, with which his family had been connected from his great grandmother's time, and in which his sister had a similar interest. But I may mention it in this place, whether or no. I'm not certain. I'm going to read that again because I don't understand the point of this. Let's see. I'm not certain whether I found out then or afterwards without being actively concerned in any business. So he's just saying that the way Mr. Murdstone earned his money was through a family business, a wine selling business. And he thinks he may have heard it that night. After dinner, when we were sitting by the fire and I was meditating an escape to Peggotty without having the hardihood to slip away. Hardy kind of means like strong. So having hardihood, that's not a word that you would use today ever. I've never used it, but I can understand what it might mean, like having the bravery or the strength to run away, to leave the room. He was afraid to leave the room. He wanted to go see Peggotty, who I guess he felt was still his friend, but he was too scared to leave the room where his mother and Mr. Murdstone were. I was meditating an escape to Peggotty, without having the hardihood, without having the bravery to slip away to escape, lest it should offend the master of the house. A coach drove up to the garden gate, and he went out to receive the visitor. My mother followed him. I was timidly following her. When she turned round at the parlor door in the dusk, dusk is the time when the sun goes down. You may know it as sunset, but you can also say dusk. In the dusk, and taking me in her embrace, as she used to do, whispered me to love my new father and be obedient to him. She did this hurriedly and secretly, as if it were wrong, but tenderly. Tenderly is like softly. And putting out her hand behind her, held mine in it until we came near to where he was standing in the garden, where she let mine go and drew hers through his arm. So when the sister was arriving, she let go of his hand and she grabbed her husband's hand. It was Miss Murdstone who was arrived, and a gloomy-looking lady she was. Gloomy means like dark and sad and serious. Dark, like her brother, whom she greatly resembled in face and voice. So they looked very similar, and they sounded very similar. And with very heavy eyebrows, with very big eyebrows, nearly meeting over her large nose. So it was almost like one big eyebrow. As if being disabled by the wrongs of her sex from wearing whiskers, she had carried them to that account. Wait. And with very heavy eyebrows nearly meeting over her large nose, as if being disabled by wrongs of her sex from wearing whiskers, She had carried them to that account. She brought with her 2 uncompromising black boxes. Is she... Now, whiskers are, maybe what a man has for like a beard or a mustache. Those are whiskers. You don't call that hair, you call those whiskers. And a cat or a dog or a lot of animals have whiskers. Those are whiskers. But I'm not sure if he's calling her eyebrows whiskers because they were very heavy and thick, or if he's saying that she had a mustache. Maybe she had a mustache. I don't know. I'm not sure about that sentence. Though even if I read it 2 or 3 times, I don't understand it. With very heavy eyebrows nearly meeting over her large nose, as if being disabled by the wrongs of her sex from wearing whiskers. She had carried them to that account. I guess maybe he's saying that she didn't bother to remove the whiskers. She didn't care. She just kept them. Okay, let's see. She brought with her 2 uncompromising hard black boxes with her initials on the lids and in hard brass nails. But I just want to show you a picture of a lid because that's a pretty useful word. Oh no. These days when you search for the word lid, you get something completely devoid of its original meaning. These are lids. So the lid is like the top of something. Could be a jar like this, but it could be a box. Let's see, if I do box lid, what do I get? See, you can see the lid of the box here. Okay. Let me just adjust something here. All right. Where were we? Okay, so with 2 block, her initials, so her name. If her name is Murdstone, then there's a big M. That's an initial. I think her first name is Jane. I don't remember. We'll find out probably in a minute. But so if it's Jane, let's just say it's Jane. It would say JM. Those are initials. With her initials on the lids, on the top of the boxes. When she paid the coachman, she took her money out of her hard steel purse, and she kept the purse in a very jail of a bag which hung upon her arm by a heavy chain, but shut up like a bite. I don't know what that means, shut up like a bite. Closed or locked, I know, but I'm not sure why it says a bite here. I had never at the time seen such a metallic lady altogether as Miss Murdstone was. So metallic means like metal, like steel, like some strong, I guess you could say the microphone is metal. So something that's metallic is like this. And he's saying she was a metallic lady, so she's very hard looking and very serious. She was brought into the parlor with many tokens of welcome, and there formally recognized my mother as a new and near relation, and then she looked at me and said, "Is that your boy, sister-in-law?" My mother acknowledged me. "Generally speaking," said Miss Murdstone, "I don't like boys. How do you do, boy?" Under these encouraging circumstances, I replied that I was very well, and that I hoped that she was the same, with such an indifferent grace that Miss Murdstone disposed of me in 2 words. Once, manner, meaning he needs to be taught how to behave with people. He needs to know how to treat people respectfully. Having uttered which, with great distinctness, she begged the favor of being shown to her room, which became to me from that time forth a place of awe and dread. So awe is like awesome. You know that word probably, awesome. Awe is like surprise or amazement or something like that. And dread is like feeling scared and nervous. So once she started living in that room, whenever he saw the door, he would be scared and frightened and nervous. Okay. Which became, let's just start from the beginning again. Having uttered which, with great distinctness, she begged the favor of being shown to her room. She said, "Take me to my room," which became to me from that time forth a place of awe and dread. So he was always afraid of that place after that. Wherein the two black boxes were never seen open or known to be left unlocked, and where, for I peeped, yeah, for I peeped in once or twice when she was out. Peeped is like this. So he opened the door and looked in to see what was happening in the room when Miss Murdstone wasn't there. Numerous little steel fetters and rivets with which Miss Murdstone embellished herself when she was dressed generally hung upon the looking glass in formidable array. Well, I think he means jewelry, but rivets, let's just see. Now, I'm not sure what fetters are. Let's see what, if I look for a picture of fetters. Yeah, so I think that he means jewelry, but he's describing it in a very funny way, you know, because to him it looked more like something like these things. These are, according to Google, fetters. And rivets are these. Rivets are the, you see the little circles? Those are rivets. So that's something very common that you would see. These are, oops, these are rivets. Okay. So he's saying numerous little steel fetters and rivets with which Miss Murdstone embellished herself. Embellish means make more beautiful or make improve or make prettier or something. So I think that's her jewelry. And she would hang that on the mirror in a formidable array. So a collection, like a very scary collection of jewelry, was next to the mirror. As well as I could make out, she had come for good, and had no intention of ever going again. She began to help my mother next morning, and was in and out of the store closet all day, putting things to rights, and making havoc in the old arrangements. Making havoc means like causing chaos, causing problems. So the next day, she started to change things in the house instead of the way the mother usually did things. Miss Murdstone changed things to do them her way. She took over the house. She took control of the house. Almost the first remarkable thing I observed in Miss Murdstone was her being constantly haunted by a suspicion that the servants had a man secreted somewhere in the premises. So that means a man hidden somewhere, meaning Peggotty was hiding someone somewhere in the house. So the Miss Murdstone was paranoid. Under the influence of this delusion, she dived into the coal cellar. Cellar is a floor below the house where things are stored, in this case coal, and coal is used to heat the house or to heat the oven, at the most untimely hours, and scarcely ever opened the door of a dark cupboard without clapping to it again, in belief that she had got him. So she would go down into the cellar, into the basement, in the middle of the night, looking to see if she could find someone. And when she opened a cabinet door, she would keep checking to see if somebody was hiding there. Though there was nothing very airy about Miss Murdstone, she was a perfect lark in point of getting up. She was up, and, as I believe to this hour, looking for that man before anybody in the house was stirring. Stirring, I think we've had that word before, means like moving around. So she was up, she was awake and walking around the house before anybody else was up, before anybody else got up and was moving around. She was. So 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning, she was walking around looking for some mystery person. Peggotty gave it as her opinion that she even slept with one eye open. Sleeping with one eye open means you're paranoid. That means you, even when you sleep, your eyes are still open because you think something is going to happen. Let's add that one. Sleep with one eye open. So you would sleep with one eye open when you're afraid something is going to happen to you. So when you're paranoid, when you're scared, you sleep with one eye open. You can only close one eye, and you have to leave this eye open to see what's happening. So Peggotty gave it as her opinion that she slept with one eye open. She was afraid somebody was going to attack her in the middle of the night, so she slept with one eye open. But I could not concur in this idea, for I had tried it myself after hearing the suggestion thrown out, and found it couldn't be done. So Davy took it literally, and he tried to sleep with one eye open, and he said, it's impossible, you can't do it. Because it's just an expression. On the very first morning after her arrival, she was up and ringing her bell at cock crow. A cock is a rooster, a male chicken. So, in the morning when the sun comes up, they go, "Arr, arr, arr," and that's a cock crow, or just a crow, or a rooster crow. She was up and ringing her bell. So in the 19th century, if you had servants, you had a little bell in your room, and if you needed them, you would ring your bell, and they would come to your room. Or, well, I don't know if it was that sophisticated in 1840, but I think they even had a button you could press. I don't think that they had that. Maybe they did. Who knows? But anyway, she was ringing her bell for the servant at cockcrow. So very early in the morning, she was ringing her bell to get the servant to help her get out of bed. When my mother came down to breakfast and was going to make tea, Miss Murdstone gave her a kind of peck on the cheek, which was her nearest approach to a kiss, and said, now, birds, birds when they're, with their nose, they do this, they hit things with their nose. That's pecking. And a peck on the cheek, remember this is cheek, we just talked about that a minute ago, is like a very, very small kiss. That's a peck on the cheek. That's a little peck on the cheek. So when my mother came down to breakfast and was going to make the tea, Miss Murdstone would give her a little kiss on the cheek, a little peck on the cheek, which was her nearest approach to a kiss. And so it seemed like a not very good kiss, like not a very sincere or nice kiss. And said, now, Clara, my dear, I'm come here, to relieve you of all the trouble I can. You're much too pretty and thoughtless. So the sister is saying, I've come here to start managing your house for you because you're not very smart. You're just pretty and you're not smart at all. And I know how to manage things. My mother blushed, but laughed. So, it's kind of insulting, but what can you do in that situation? So she laughed. Her face turned red. She blushed, and she laughed, and seemed not to dislike this character. To have any duties imposed upon you that could be undertaken by me. If you'll be so good as to give me your keys, my dear, I'll attend to all this sort of thing in the future. So Miss Murdstone is asking for the keys to the house, not just to the doors of the outside, but the doors to the locked silver, the cabinets that have the silver and the valuable things, and maybe where they keep the wine and other valuable things. In other words, all of her money, almost probably. From that time, Miss Murdstone kept the keys in her own little jail all day and under her pillow at night, and my mother had no more to do with them than I had. So Miss Murdstone took control over the whole house and all of its and anything of value inside of it. My mother did not suffer her authority to pass from her without a shadow of protest. One night, when Miss Murdstone had been developing certain household plans to her brother, of which he signified his approbation, my mother suddenly began to cry and said she thought she might have been consulted. So the husband and the sister were talking about the sister's duties and what she's been doing in the house, and the mother felt like she wasn't included. It's her house, and she said, "What about me? Why didn't you ask me about it?" And here's the answer. "Clara," said Miss Murdstone sternly. Sternly means seriously. "Clara," said Mr. Murdstone sternly. "Clara, I wonder at you." So, I don't understand you, is really what he's saying. I don't understand you. "Oh, it's very well to say you wonder, Edward," cried my mother. So she's saying, oh yeah, okay, you can say you don't understand. And it's very well for you to talk about firmness. And it's okay for you to say be strong, but you wouldn't like it yourself. So she's saying, if I did this to you, you would object to it. So shut up. Firmness, I may observe, was the grand quality on which Mr. and Miss Murdstone took their stand. So firmness, not moving, very strong. That's how they did things. That's what he's saying. Miss Murdstone and the father, the husband, they're very strong. They don't move. They're very stubborn, firm. However, I might have expressed my comprehension of it at this time. If I had been called upon, I nevertheless did clearly comprehend, in my own way, that it was another name for tyranny and for a certain gloomy, arrogant devil's humor that was in them both. So they called it firmness, but Davy's saying it wasn't firmness, it was, what did he say? They call it firmness, but in his mind, what he realized it was tyranny. Tyranny is like a type of government where the leader makes all the rules, like a dictatorship or something like that. That's a tyranny. And so they call it firmness, but Davy calls it tyranny, like a dictatorship. And what else did he call it? Gloomy and arrogant, gloomy, depressing, sad. Devil's humor, the way the devil would feel or act. That's how they were. That's what they were. They said firmness, but they were really all of these other things. The creed, as I should state, is the creed as I should state it now is this: Mr. Murdstone was firm. Nobody in his world was to be so firm as Mr. Murdstone. Nobody else in the world was to be firm at all, for everybody was to be bent to his firmness. So he didn't listen to other people. He expected other people to always listen to him. That's what he meant by firm. Miss Murdstone was an exception. So the one person who could tell him what to do or give him orders was his sister. She might be firm, but only by relationship and in an inferior... maybe not. Well, it says everyone was to be bent to his firmness, which means everybody had to listen to him. He expected everyone to listen to him and what he said, and not the other way around. But then it says Miss Murdstone was an exception, which means, but not his sister. She didn't have to listen to him. But then he says she might be firm, but only by relationship and in an inferior and tributary degree. My mother was another exception. She might be firm and must be, but only in bearing their firmness and firmly believing there was no other firmness upon earth. Oh, that's kind of complicated. I think that he's got a sense of humor here when he writes this. But okay, so I'm not sure why he's calling them exceptions because uh, Miss Murdston is firm, but only by relationship. So Miss Murdston is firm only because she's his sister, and to a tributary degree, meaning she's only firm in that she she believes in what he says and pays attention to what he says. And she respects him. And my mother was another exception. She might be firm and must be, but only in bearing their firm. So only to bear something means to carry something, to tolerate something. So to bear their firmness means she's carrying their firmness. It's not easy to carry their firmness, but she does. And firmly believing 100% that there was no other firmness upon earth. That's a complicated thing. I think it's a little joke he made. It's very hard, said my mother, that in my own house. My own house, said Mr. Murdston. Clara, our own house, I mean, faltered my mother, evidently frightened. I hope you must know what I mean, Edward. It's very hard that in our own house I may not have a word to say about domestic matters. I'm sure I managed very well before we were married. There's evidence, said my mother, sobbing. Remember, sobbing is crying. Ask Peggotty if I didn't do very well when I wasn't interfered with. So she's saying, I don't need your help in managing the house. I can do it myself. And I don't like that you're not asking me. Edward, said Mrs. Murdston, let there be an end of this. I go tomorrow. So she's now the sister is insulted because she's acting like she's doing the mother a favor. You know, I'm managing your house for you, and all you do is complain about me. So she's saying, I'm leaving tomorrow. Her name is Jane. Jane Murdston, said her brother, be silent. How dare you insinuate that you don't know my character better than your words imply? I'm sure my poor mother went on at a grievous disadvantage and with many tears. I don't want anybody to go. So she's saying, don't leave. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to insult you. I should be very miserable and unhappy if anybody was to go. I don't ask much. I'm not unreasonable. I only want to be consulted sometimes. I'm very much obliged to anybody who assists me, and I only want to be consulted as a mere form sometimes. I thought you were pleased once with my being a little inexperienced and girlish, Edward. I'm sure you said so, but you seem to hate me for it now. You are so severe. So the mother is saying, oh, you thought before that it was cute that I didn't know very much or I didn't have very much experience, but now it's like you hate me because I don't know very much or I'm not very experienced. And she says, you're so severe. It's kind of like serious and difficult to be severe. Extreme. Maybe a good way is extreme. So his reaction is very extreme to just a little protest. Hey, include me in the house, in the business of the house. And they're all insulted because of that. And she's saying that's very severe. That's a very extreme reaction to a reasonable request. Edward, said Mrs. Murdston again, let there be an end of this. I go tomorrow. So she's saying, no, I'm leaving. I'm so insulted by you. Jane Murdston thundered, Mr. Murdston, will you be silent? How dare you? So thunder, if there's rain or a storm, you get the lightning, and the sound that you hear in a storm, the that's thunder. And so Jane Murdston thundered, Mr. Murdston, means that he said it in a very strong, loud, intimidating, scary way. Jane Murdston, will you be silent? How dare you? So it's thundered. Miss Murdston made a jail delivery of her pocket handkerchief and held it before her eyes. So he keeps comparing her purse to a jail, a prison. So I guess it's a very secure purse. So she made a jail delivery, which means she unlocked the jail and got her handkerchief so that she could wipe her eyes. Clara, he continued, looking at my mother, you surprise me. You astound me. Astound is like surprise. Yes, I had a satisfaction in the thought of marrying an inexperienced and artless person. Artless means without art. In this case, it's maybe the art of taking care of the house, I guess. So, like a person with no good skills at taking care of the house and forming her character and infusing it into some amount of that firmness and decision of which it stood in need. This is such complicated 19th century language. Yes, I had the satisfaction and the thought of marrying an inexperienced. So he's saying, yes, when we met and I married you, I had this idea in my head that I could change you and make you smarter and make you better at managing the house. That was his idea when he married her. But when Miss Jane Murdstone is kind enough to come to my assistance in this endeavor, and to assume for my sake a condition something like a housekeeper's, and when she meets with this base return, so he's saying you've insulted her. She's come to help you and educate you, and help you learn how to take care of a house properly. Like a housekeeper. She's no housekeeper. That's an insult for her to take this job of managing the house. And he can't believe how rude she's being by insisting that she be included in the decisions of the house. Oh, pray, pray, Edward, cried my mother, don't accuse me of being ungrateful. I'm sure I'm not ungrateful. No one ever said I was before. I have my many faults, but not that. Oh, don't, my dear. When Jane Murdstone meets, I say, he went on, after waiting until my mother was silent, with a base return, that feeling of mine is chilled and altered. So he's saying, suddenly, I don't want to help you anymore. You're so rude to my sister that actually I don't feel very good about you at all right now. Oh, don't, my love, say that, implored my mother very piteously. Oh, don't, Edward. I can't bear to hear it. I can't tolerate to hear it. I can't carry that, what you've said. Whatever I am, I'm affectionate. I know I'm affectionate. I wouldn't say if I wasn't certain that I am. Ask Peggotty. I'm sure she'll tell you I'm affectionate. I'm a very loving, nice person. There's no extent of mere weakness. There is no extent of mere weakness, Clara, said Mr. Murdstone in reply, that can have the least weight with me. You lose breath. So he's saying your weakness can't influence me. I see. He sees her as weak, and he sees this, her crying or being sad about this, I guess, as being pathetic. And he's saying, I don't care. Do it. You can cry all you want. I don't care. Pray let us be friends, said my mother. I couldn't live under the coldness or unkindness. I couldn't live under coldness or unkindness. I'm so sorry. I have a great many defects, I know. I have a great many defects. I have a great many imperfections, I know. And it's very good of you, Edward, with your strength of mind to endeavor to correct them for me. So she's saying, thank you for trying to help me become better, to improve, to not be so weak or imperfect. Jane, I don't object to anything. I should be quite broken-hearted if you thought of leaving. My mother was too much overcome to go on. Jane Murdstone, said Mr. Murdstone to her brother, to his sister, any harsh words between us are, I hope, uncommon. It is not my fault. So unusual an occurrence has taken place tonight. I was betrayed into it by another. Nor is it your fault. You were betrayed into it by another. But let us both try to forget it. And as this, he added, after the magnanimous words, is not a fit scene for the boy. David, go to bed. So he's saying harsh words. Harsh means bad or hard or unpleasant. Strong and unpleasant. So harsh words means like exchanging bad words, saying bad things to each other. It's not my fault. He's saying it's not my fault that we started saying all of these bad things, and it isn't your fault either. It's somebody else's. So they're blaming the mother for this little argument or this little upset in the house. And then he tells Davy to go to bed. Well, they're very manipulative and mean to the mother. I could hardly find the door through the tears that stood in my eyes. I was so sorry for my mother's distress, but I groped my way out. So groping is when you can't see and you feel you're looking for something, you're feeling with your hands. That's groping. I groped my way to my room. So it must have been very dark. Yeah, he says I groped my way to my room in the dark. So, if there's no lights, you have to feel your way to your room. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, no lights and you can't see, so you have to touch everything to know where everything is. That's groping your way through the dark. Without even having the heart to say goodnight to Peggotty or to get a candle from her. When her coming up to look for me an hour or so afterwards awoke me, she said that my mother had gone to bed poorly, and that Mr. and Miss Murdstone were sitting alone. Going down the next morning, rather early than usual, I paused outside the parlor door on hearing my mother's voice. She was very earnestly and humbly entreating Miss Murdstone's pardon, so even the next morning she was asking Miss Murdstone to forgive her for the night before. Which that lady granted, so she said, "Okay, yeah, I forgive you." And a perfect reconciliation took place. I never knew my mother afterwards to give an opinion on any matter without first appealing to Miss Murdstone. Wow. So from that moment on, she always asked Miss Murdstone before she expressed her opinion about anything, or without having first ascertained by some sure means what Miss Murdstone's opinion was. So if Miss Murdstone wasn't there, she would have to first try to think to herself, what would Miss Murdstone think in this situation before she would give her opinion. Or without having and I never saw Miss Murdstone when out of temper. She was infirm that way. Infirm means sick. So she was always out of temper could mean sick back then. So I don't know if he means like out of temper, like not happy, not in a good mood, or actually very sick. Because he's using the word infirm, but again, that could mean she was sick in that she was always in a bad mood. Let's see, move her hand towards her bag as if she were going to take out the keys and offer to resign them to my mother without seeing my mother. Without seeing that, my mother was in terrible fright. Let's read that again. Miss Murdstone, when out of temper, so I think in a bad mood, Miss Murdstone, when out of temper, would move her hands towards her bag as if she were going to take out the keys and offer to resign them to my mother. Like, here, take the keys, I'm leaving. Without seeing that my mother was in a terrible... So she enjoyed that. She would do that sometimes, like, go for the keys, like, I'm leaving. And she would enjoy seeing the mother suffer. Like, oh no, please don't leave. She enjoyed that. The gloomy taint that was in the Murdstone blood darkened the Murdstone religion, which was austere and wrathful. I thought since that it's assuming that the character was a necessary consequence of Mr. Murdstone's firmness, which wouldn't allow him to let anybody off from the utmost weight of the severest penalties he could find any excuse. I know there's a lot to explain here, but I just want to get the full idea before I go back and talk about it. But as it may, I well remember the tremendous visages with which we used to go to church, and the changed air of the place. Okay, So the gloomy taint that was in the Murdstone blood, taint is like imperfection or stain, if you know the word stain. So the Murdstone blood was tainted. There was a gloomy taint in the Murdstone blood, which meant maybe that both Murdstones had this, I guess, aura. That's a word you probably, I don't know if you know that word, aura, but there was something bad in the Murdstone blood. Let's say that. The gloomy taint in the Murdstone blood darkened the Murdstone religion. So even when they tried to be religious, when they would go to church, that would also have this perverse characteristic. So even when they were doing something nice, like going to church, they did it in a bad way. There was something bad about it, something ugly about it. And it shouldn't have been that way. Which was austere. Austere is kind of serious. And wrathful. Wrathful means that you like to get revenge. Maybe let's put that word up here. Wrathful. We haven't put up a word in a while, so let's put one up. Wrath is about getting revenge. So if you're a wrathful person, that means that you like to you enjoy taking revenge. That's something that you always do when you feel like somebody has done something wrong to you. They will feel your wrath. You are a wrathful person. So the Murdstone religion, because it says here, the gloomy taint that was in the Murdstone blood darkened the Murdstone religion, which was austere and wrathful. So their version of religion was all about revenge. Who deserves what punishment? Okay, I have thought since that it's assuming the character was a necessary consequence of Mr. Murdstone's firmness. So he thought that this was all part of Mr. Murdstone's philosophy about always being firm, which wouldn't allow him to let anybody off from the utmost weight of the severest penalties he could find an excuse for. So he didn't forgive people. He thought that if you did something wrong, that you should suffer the worst penalty, the worst punishment for whatever it is that you did wrong. Be this as it may, I well remember the tremendous visages with which we used to go to church, and the changed air of the place. Again, the dreaded Sunday comes around, and I file into the old pew first, like a guarded captive brought to a condemned service. Again, Miss Murdstone in a black velvet gown that looks as if it had been made of a pall, followed close upon me, then my mother, then her husband. There is no Peggotty now, as in the old time. Again, I listened to Miss Murdstone mumbling the responses and emphasizing all the dread words with a cruel relish. So he's talking about, before we saw that scene where he went to church and his mind was going different places. He was thinking about the boy there and imagining all kinds of different things, and it wasn't bad. Maybe it was boring for him, but he imagined different things. But now with the Murdstones there's kind of an ugly feeling when you go to church. It's not nice. And he says, dreaded Sunday. Remember, dread means like a nervous, scared feeling. So a dreaded Sunday, that's like, oh no, Sunday, I hate that Sunday. I hate going to church with these people. I hate this event. You start feeling all these emotions. That's dread. The dreaded Sunday comes round, and I file into the pew first, like a guarded captive. So he's like a prisoner, and they make him go first into the pew. That's the seat in the church. And Miss Murdstone in a black velvet gown that looks as if it had been made out of a pall. Let's see what pall is. I don't know. I've seen that word before, but I'm not sure what it means. I think it's some 19th century thing. Oh. Let's see if we can find a picture, because I think it's hard to explain. Maybe let's try this. Do they? Well, maybe they don't do this sort of thing very much anymore because it's kind of hard to find a picture of it. Where it's obvious what's happening. Well, it's a piece of cloth, and it's used for very serious things like funerals. So I guess maybe they don't even do this anymore because I can't find a picture of it. But you know, when somebody dies, this is the box is called a coffin, and they would put a piece of cloth over it, and that's a pall. But also, wait, let's see. According to Google, over a coffin, hearse. A hearse is the transportation. Let's see. Let's find a hearse. I'm sure there won't be a pall hearse, but a hearse is the vehicle where you put a coffin to carry it to the place where it goes. So a pall is a cloth that covers a hearse or a tomb or a coffin. Okay, so Mrs. Murdstone in her black velvet gown, it looked like a pall. It looked like something you would cover a coffin with. Followed close upon me. Then my mother, then her husband. There is no Peggotty now, as in the old time. And again, I listened to Miss Murdstone mumbling. Mumbling is so when they're saying the prayers, she doesn't really say them clearly. She just says like she doesn't. Maybe she doesn't know the words, but when they get to the bad words, the words about pain or suffering, she says those words. You can hear her say those words. So it would be like punishment, pain. That's what he's saying she's doing. So she only says the horrible words. You can only understand clearly the horrible words is what he's saying. Okay, again, I see her dark eyes roll around the church when she says miserable sinners. So maybe that's one of the phrases in the prayer. Miserable sinners. So she loves those words and she says them clearly. As if she were calling all the congregation names. So it's kind of like she's accusing people when she says it. Miserable sinners. Again, I catch rare glimpses of my mother moving her lips timidly between the two. So Miss Murdstone, she's mumbling, but the mother, she's not really saying anything. She's just. Did you ever have to sing in like a group in school and you didn't feel like singing, so you just move your lips to make it look like you're singing, but you're really not? I think that's what the mother is doing, because he says she's timidly moving her lips, shyly, timidly. So just very little, but she's not really saying. If she's just moving her lips, she's not really saying anything. With one of them muttering at each ear like low thunder. So muttering is like mumbling. Only when you're muttering, you're usually saying something bad. Okay, let's see. Actually, I want to put that word mutter up here to remind me to do something with it. That's kind of a good word, to mutter. So to mutter is, imagine I tell you, go clean the room. And you say, okay, but then you walk away and say, I'm going to clean that room. What is he doing, telling me to clean the room? That's muttering. So it's like complaining, but very low, very soft complaining. Okay, again, I wonder with a sudden fear whether it is likely that our good old clergymen can be wrong, and Mr. and Miss Murdstone right, and that all the angels in heaven can be destroying angels. So I guess David's going to the dark side. Instead of thinking the clergyman is right, that there's good in the world and everybody is good, he's thinking that maybe it's Mr. and Miss Murdstone are right and everybody should suffer. Again, if I move a finger or relax a muscle of my face, Miss Murdstone pokes me with her prayer book, and makes my side ache. So if Davy, he's very tense when he's at the church, and if he relaxes, Miss Murdstone gets angry and pokes him with the prayer book. Yes, and again we walk home. I note some neighbors looking down at my mother and at me and whispering. So they're talking about her. Again, as the three go on, arm in arm, I linger behind alone. Linger means uh, staying somewhere after everyone else leaves. So they're walking away, and he's walking slowly on purpose to kind of be apart from them. He's lingering. Uh, I follow some of those looks and wonder if my mother's step be really not so light as I've seen it, and if the gaiety of her beauty be really almost worried away. So he's watching her from far away, and she doesn't look as happy as she used to be. She doesn't walk as happily as she used to walk. Again, I wonder whether any of the neighbors call to mind, as I do, how we used to walk home together, she and I would wonder stupidly about all the dreary, dismal day. Dreary and dismal is like sad and pointless. Okay. There had been some talk on occasions of my going to a boarding school. A boarding school is boarding really means like feeding. So a school where they feed you, but it really means like a school where you live and they feed you. So a boarding school, that means he wouldn't live at home anymore. He would live at the school. That's what a boarding school is. So there had been some talk on occasions of my going to a boarding school. So they were talking about sending him away from the house. Mr. and Miss Murdstone had originated it, and my mother had of course agreed with them. Nothing, however, was concluded on the subject. In the meantime, I learned lessons at home. Shall I ever forget those lessons? They were presided over nominally by my mother, but really by Mr. Murdstone and his mother. So nominally means by name. So the idea was that the mother was giving the lessons, but really it was Mr. and Mrs. Murdstone giving the lessons. Sorry, Miss Murdstone, who were always present, and found them a favorable occasion for giving my mother lessons in that miscalled firmness, which was the bane of both of our lives. I believe I was kept at home for that purpose. So he believes he was kept at home so that they could abuse him and make him suffer. I had been apt enough to learn, and willing enough, when my mother and I had lived alone together. I can faintly remember learning the alphabet at her knee. To this day, when I look upon the fat black letters in the primer, the puzzling novelty of their shapes, and the easy good nature of O and Q and S, seem to present themselves again before me as they used to do. But they recall no feeling of disgust or reluctance. On the contrary, I seem to have walked along a path of flowers as far as the crocodile book, and to have been cheered by the gentleness of my mother's voice and manner all the way. But these solemn lessons, which succeeded those, I remember as the death blow at my peace and a grievous daily drudgery and misery. Drudgery is like kind of like suffering, non-enjoyment. Drudgery is something where you do it every day and you don't enjoy it, you don't like it. So if you talk about the drudgery of work, maybe that's a good word to put up. We'll put drudgery here. So that's like the daily routine that you do, but you don't like it. It's boring for you. It's maybe makes you feel miserable. And he's talking about the drudgery of these classes he was taking with his mother and the Murdstones. Perfectly unintelligible, some of them to me, and I was generally as much bewildered bewildered means like confused, by them, as I believe my poor mother was. Let me remember how it used to be, and bring one morning back again. I came into the second best parlor after my breakfast with my books, an exercise book, and slate. Slate is like a little chalkboard for writing. Before paper was easily available, you would have a little chalkboard that you could write and erase very quickly. My mother is ready for me at her writing desk, but not half so ready as Mr. Murdstone in his easy chair by the window, though he pretends to be reading a book, or as Miss Murdstone sitting near my mother, stringing steel beads. Beads are little round things, so maybe she's making a necklace, stringing beads, putting beads on a string. Let's find a picture of beads, just so you know what they are. Okay, these are beads. These are beads. But these are happy beads. They're nice and colorful. She was stringing steel beads, so those are not very nice or colorful. A little bit hard. Okay. The very sight of these two has such an influence over me that I begin to feel the words I have been at infinite pains to get into my head, all sliding away and going, I don't know where. I wonder where they do go, by the by. I'm not sure if this means something different 170 years ago, but if you say by the by, and it's not very common, but if you said by the by, that would mean like by the way. I wonder where they do go, by the way. Yeah, I guess that's probably what it means. I'm not sure. I don't know where. You don't have to worry about that phrase anyway. Nobody uses it anymore. But I've been in infinite pains to get into my head, all sliding away and going, I don't know where. Wait a minute. So the very sight of these two had such an influence over me that I begin to feel the words that I have been at infinite pains to get into my... So he says, I don't know what word it is, but those two sitting in the room while my mother was giving me lessons gave me such a weird feeling. I wish I could think of a word to describe that feeling. Okay, I hand the first book to my mother. Perhaps it is a grammar, perhaps history, perhaps geography. I take a last drowning look at the page as I give it into her hand, and start off aloud at a racing pace while I have got it fresh. I trip over a word. Miss Murdstone looks up. I trip over another. So he's saying the wrong words, or he's pausing because he's nervous. And whenever that happens, Miss Murdstone, she's doing her beads. She looks up, which makes him feel very uncomfortable. I redden, so my face gets red because I'm embarrassed. Tumble over half a dozen words. Remember, tumble is like this, falling down like this. And so he tumbles over words. That means he's not expressing the words easily. It's hard for him to say the words. The words are tumbling. Or he's tumbling over the words. He's falling over the words. I think my mother would show me the book if she dared, but she does not dare, and she says softly, "Oh, Davy, Davy." So Davy's trying to remember what he's learned and try to tell his mother what he's learned, but he's so nervous because of the Murdstones that he can't speak very well. And the mother wants to help him. She wants to show the book to him, but she's afraid to because of the Murdstones. So she says, "Oh, Davy, Davy." "Now, Clara," says Mr. Murdstone, "be firm with the boy. Don't say, 'Oh, Davy, Davy.' That's childish. He knows his lesson. He knows his lesson, or does not know his lesson." "He does not know it," Miss Murdstone interposes awfully. "I'm really afraid he does not," says my mother. "Then you see, Clara," returns Miss Murdstone, "you should just give him the book back and make him know it." Yes, certainly, my mother. Yes, certainly, my mother. That's, says my mother. That's what I intend to do, my dear Jane. Now, Davy, try once more, and don't be stupid. So now that she has permission to give him the book, she gives him the book. I obey the first clause of the injunction by trying once more, but am not so successful with the second, for I am very stupid. I tumble down more before I get to the old place, and at a point where I was all right before, and stop to think. But I can't think about the lesson. I think of the number of yards of net in Miss Murdstone's cap. So Miss Murdstone's wearing something over her head made out of lace. If you don't know what lace is, let's get a picture of lace. This is lace. So, so he says, I can't think of the answer of the problem that you're asking me because he's too distracted by Miss Murdstone's cap of lace. It has yards of lace. Yards is like a meter. It's about the size of a meter, a yard. So it's got meters of lace. Let's see. I think of the number of yards, how many meters of lace. Oh no, he doesn't say lace. It says net. See, that's a funny thing. Okay, let me show you net. Uh, a net is something like this. Whoops. See, I was thinking lace because, ladies' caps were made of lace, but hers is net. I can't really. Oh, you see it. I can't get it in the middle, but you can see what a net is. That's a net. All right, let's go back to. See if I can do this. Okay. I'm using a different scene here. All right. I have to figure out what I ruined later. Okay. But I can't think about the lesson. I think of the number of yards in Miss Murdstone's cap, or of the price of Mr. Murdstone's dressing gown. So Mr. Murdstone is wearing like a robe, and I guess it must look very expensive because Davy is thinking about the price, how much it cost, or any such ridiculous problem that I have no business with and don't want to have anything at all to do with. So he's saying I really don't care about these things, but I think about them anyway. Mr. Murdstone makes a movement of impatience, which I've been expecting for a long time. Miss Murdstone does the same. My mother glances submissively at them, shuts the book, lays it by as an arrear to be worked out with my other tasks, when my other tasks are done. There's a pile of these arrears very soon. Arrears are things like backup of work, like if you have too much work and you can't finish it, or if you owe money and you're late paying. Those are arrears. So things you're supposed to be doing, but it's piling up and you can't do it all at once, and it swells like a rolling snowball. The bigger it gets, the more stupid I get. The case is so hopeless, and I feel that I'm wallowing in such a bog of nonsense that I give up all idea of getting out and abandon myself to my fate. Let's look at this word wallow. To wallow. Let me find a picture of wallow if I can. Okay. This is a pretty good picture of wallow. See this pig here? He's wallowing in mud. You usually use this word with pigs because pigs like to, or maybe this is maybe better. Oh, wait. Let's see what happens with this one. Yeah. Well, this is a dog wallowing in mud. So wallowing is when you're rolling around in something. So it's used a lot with negative emotions like wallowing in depression. You know, when you're kind of enjoying being depressed. Oh, I'm so depressed. I'm so depressed. That's wallowing in depression. You can wallow. It's usually negative when you're wallowing in something. That's usually a pretty bad thing to do. Wallowing. Okay, so let's see. What was Davy wallowing in? Let's see. The bigger it gets, the more stupid I get. The case is so hopeless. I feel that I'm wallowing in such a bog of nonsense. So he's wallowing around. This whole thing is nonsense to him, and he's just rolling around in it. Oh, this is all so stupid. The Murdstones, the lessons, the whole situation. That I give up all idea of getting out and abandon myself to my fate. So he stops thinking about maybe one day this will end, and he just says, "Okay, I give up. Let's do this." The despairing way in which my mother and I look at each other as I blunder on. Blunder means like making mistakes. So as I blunder on means as I keep making mistakes and keep doing the wrong thing. It's truly melancholy. It's truly sad. But the greatest effect in these miserable lessons is when my mother, thinking nobody is observing, tries to give me the cue by the motion of her lips at that instant. So the mother is asking her questions and Davy doesn't know, and the mother is trying to help him. But then Miss Murdstone, who's been waiting, she's pretending to make her necklace, but really she's been waiting for the opportunity to criticize the mother, has been lying in wait for nothing else all along, says in a deep voice, "Clara!" My mother starts, colors, and smiles faintly. Mr. Murdstone comes out of his chair, takes the book, throws it at me, or boxes my ears with it, and tries and turns me out of the room by the shoulders. So he makes me leave the room. Even when the lessons are done, the worst is yet to happen, in the shape of an appalling sum. This is invented for me and delivered to me orally by Mr. Murdstone, and begins, if I go into a cheesemonger's shop, a place where they sell cheese, and buy 5,000 double Gloucester cheeses at 4 pence halfpenny each, present payment, at which I see Miss Murdstone secretly overjoyed. So she loves it. He's giving him some kind of complicated problem. I pore over these cheeses without any result or enlightenment until dinner time, when, having made a mulatto of myself by getting the dirt of the slate into the pores of my skin, I have a slice of bread and help and to help me out with the cheeses, and am considered in disgrace for the rest of the evening. I really don't understand what he's talking about. To pour over, see, he says, uh, I pour over the cheeses. I look at the cheeses very carefully, and without any result or enlightenment until dinner time. So I don't know what he means. I look at the cheeses very carefully, and I don't learn anything until dinner time. When having made a mulatto of myself, when having gotten dirty of the slate into the pores of my skin, I have a slice of bread to help me out with the cheeses, and am considered a disgrace for the rest of the evening. I don't understand that. I'm not going to try to. It's too complicated. Doesn't matter. Okay, it seems to me, at this distance of time, as if my unfortunate studies generally took this course. I could have done very well if I had been without the Murdstones, but the influence of the Murdstones upon me was like the fascination of two snakes on a wretched young bird. So he's a poor young bird, and these two snakes are just always around him, fascinated by him, ready to eat him. Even when I did get through the morning with tolerable credit, there was not much gained but dinner, for Miss Murdstone never could endure to see me untasked. So Miss Murdstone always tried to make him do something. She didn't like it when he was sitting doing nothing. And if I rashly made any show of being unemployed, called her brother's attention to me, saying, "Clara, my dear, there's nothing like work. Give your boy an exercise," which caused me to be clapped down to some new labor there and then. As to any recreation with any other child of my age, I had very little of that, for the gloomy theology of the Murdstones made all children out to be a swarm of little vipers. So in the Murdstone religion, children were little rotten evil things. Though there was a child once set in the midst of the disciples, and held that they contaminated one another. The natural result of this treatment continued, I suppose, for some 6 months, to make me sullen. Sullen means sad or depressed, dull and dogged. I was not made the less so by my sense of being daily more and more shut out and alienated from my mother. So it seems like over those 6 months, he was very depressed because of the Murdstone situation, but also it seems like he and his mother were getting further and further apart. They weren't so close anymore. I believe I should have been almost stupefied, but for one circumstance. It was this. My father had a small collection of books in a little room upstairs, to which I had access, for it adjoined my own. So there was a little room that was attached to Davy's room, and in that room were books from his father, and which nobody else in our house had ever troubled. From that blessed little room, Roderick Random, Peregrine Pickle, Humphrey Clicker, Tom Jones, the Vicar of Wakefield, Don Quixote, Gil Blas, Robinson Crusoe, came out a glorious host to keep me company. So he read those books and he enjoyed them. They kept alive my fancy and my hope of something beyond that place and time. They and the Arabian Nights and the tales of the genie, and did me no harm. For whatever harm was in some of them was not there for me. I knew nothing of it. It is astonishing to me now how I found time in the midst of my porings. Remember, poring over was like to look very carefully. He was talking about poring over the cheese, examining the cheese very carefully. Poring over a book would be like reading a book very carefully with a lot of attention. That's what pour is here. It's astonishing to me how I found time in the midst of my porings and blunderings. Remember, blunderings is mistakes over heavier themes, to read those books as I did. It's curious to me how I could ever have consoled myself under my small troubles, which were great troubles to me, by impersonating my favorite characters in them. So he imagined that he was the characters in the book to escape from his horrible life. As I did, and by putting Mr. and Miss Murdstone into all the bad ones, which I did. So when there were bad people in the books or evil people in the books, he imagined them to be Mr. and Miss Murdstone. I have been Tom Jones, a child's Tom Jones, a harmless creature, for a week together. I've sustained my own idea of Roderick Random for a month at a stretch, and I verily believe, I had a greedy relish for a few volumes of voyages and travels, I forgot what now, that were on those shelves, and for days and days I can remember to have gone about my region of our house armed with the centerpiece out of an old set of boot trees. The perfect realization of Captain Somebody. Oh, so he was taking a boot tree, like a thing for putting boots, and I guess he was walking around with it pretending he was a pirate. The perfect realization of Captain Somebody. Well, not a pirate, a captain of the Royal British Navy. In danger of being beset by savages. So he was using the boot tree pretending it was a weapon. And resolved to sell his life at a great price. The captain never lost dignity, for having his ears boxed with the Latin grammar I did. But the captain was a captain and a hero, in despite of all the grammars of all the languages in the world, dead or alive. This was my only constant comfort, so the only thing that made him happy was reading those books and pretending he was a character in the book. When I think of it, the picture always rises in my mind of a summer evening, the boys at play in the churchyard, and I sitting on my bed, reading as if for life. Every barn in the neighborhood, every stone in the church, and every foot of the churchyard had some association of its own in my mind, connected with these books, and stood for some locality made famous in them. So he looked at the things around him and associated those things with the books, and that helped him survive these times. I've seen Tom Pipes go climbing up the church steeple, so he imagined the characters in the book out in the world that he could see from his window. I've watched Strap with the knapsack on his back, stopping to rest himself upon the wicket gate, and I know the Commodore Trunnion held that club with Mr. Pickle in the parlor of our little village alehouse. So an alehouse is like a pub. I have no idea who most of these characters he's referencing are. The reader now understands as well as I do what I was when I came to the point of my youthful history to which I am now coming again. So he's just saying, I'm just describing to you what my situation was like now that I'm going to tell you something important that happened. So now when I tell you this important thing, you'll understand my situation. One morning when I went into the parlor with my books, I found my mother looking anxious. Anxious is like nervous, scared. Miss Murdstone looking firm, and Mr. Murdstone binding something round the bottom of a cane, a lithe and limber cane, which he left off binding when I came in, and poised and switched in the chair. I tell you, Clara, said Mr. Murdstone, I've been often flogged myself. Now, flogged means beaten, usually with an object, like a stick or a whip or something. And it says that when he went into the room, he saw that Mr. Murdstone had a cane. He left off binding when I came in. Binding means like putting something together, so maybe he was putting leather or something around the cane, I don't know. And switched in the air. So he took the cane and was doing this, and he said, I tell you, Clara, I've often been flogged myself. So he's saying, I guess he's going to do that to Davy. But he's saying, hey, it happened to me. It did me something. It did something good for me. To be sure, of course, said Miss Murdstone. Certainly, my dear Jane, faltered my mother, meekly. Meekly means softly, quietly, shyly, weakly. But do you think it did Edward good? Do you think it did Edward harm, Clara? Asked Mr. Murdstone. That's the point, said his sister. So he's saying, do you think it did something bad to me? She can't say no to that. This, my mother returned, certainly, my dear Jane, and said no more. I felt apprehensive that I was personally interested in this dialogue, and sought Mr. Murdstone's eye as it lighted on mine, so he was happy to see Davy. Now, David, he said, and I saw that cast again, and he said, you must be far more careful today than usual, he said. The cane, another poise, another switch. You must be very careful. And having finished his preparation of it, laid it down beside him with an expressive look, and took up his book. So he's saying, you better do good with your lessons today, otherwise you're going to get the switch. Okay. This was a good freshener to my presence of mind. As a beginning, I felt the words of my lesson slipping off, not one by one or line by line, but by the entire page. I tried to lay hold of them, but they seemed, if I may so express it, to have put skates on, and to skim away from me with a smoothness there was no checking. This was a good freshener to my presence of mind. As a beginning, I felt the words of my lesson slipping off, not but one by one or line by line. So he couldn't follow anything. He was so nervous and scared that he wasn't just missing words or forgetting words. He forgot everything. I tried to lay hold of them. I tried to find them. I tried to get those words, but they seemed as if I may so express, to have put skates on and to skim away from me with smoothness. So skates, if you don't know, let's just find some ice skates. The skates could be several different things, but let's just say that these are skates. Okay, so if you're using those and you know how to do it, you could go very fast. You could go very quick. So they skated away. The words, the ideas skated away from him. Okay, we began badly and went on worse. I had come in with an idea of distinguishing myself, rather conceiving that I was very well prepared, but it turned out to be quite a mistake. Book after book was added to the heap of failures. A heap is like a pile, so he had a heap of failures. Miss Murdstone being firmly watchful of us all the time, and when we came at last to the 5,000 cheeses, I don't understand that reference of the 5,000 cheeses. Canes he made it that day, I remember. My mother burst out crying. Clara, said Miss Murdstone in her warning voice. I'm not quite well, my dear Jane, I think, said my mother. I saw him wink solemnly at his sister. This is winking. So he went like that to her. I saw him wink solemnly at his sister as he rose and said, taking the cane, Why, Jane, we can hardly expect Clara to bear with perfect firmness the worry and torment that David has occasioned her today. That would be stoical. Clara is greatly strengthened and improved, but we can hardly expect so much from her, David. You and I will go upstairs, boy. So he's saying, Like, Clara can't bear this. She can't tolerate this. We can't expect her to tolerate this. So I'll take Davy upstairs. As he took me out the door, my mother ran towards us. Miss Murdstone said, "Clara, are you a perfect fool?" and interfered. I saw my mother stop her ears then, and I heard her crying. We walked up to my room slowly and gravely. I'm certain he had a delight in that formal parade of executing justice, and when we got there, suddenly twisted my head under his arm. "Mr. Murdstone, sir," I cried, pray don't beat me. I've tried to learn, sir, but I can't learn while you and Miss Murdstone are by. I can't indeed." "Can't you indeed?" said Mr. Murdstone. "We'll try that." He had my head in a vice. A vice is like a grip. So he said that the head was under the arm, so that's the vice. But I twined round him somehow and stopped him, so he escaped for a moment, entreating him not to beat me. It was only for a moment that I stopped him, and he caught me heavily an instant afterwards. So he beat him with the cane, and in the same instant I caught the hand with which he held me in my mouth. What? I caught the hand with which he held me. Oh, so he was holding him like this, and Davy bit him between my teeth and bit it through. It sets my teeth on edge to think of it. He beat me then, as if he would have beaten me to death. Above all the noise we made, I heard them running up the stairs and crying out. I heard my mother crying out, and Peggotty. Then he was gone, and the door was locked outside, and I was lying fevered and hot and torn and sore and raging in my puny way. Puny is like very small and pathetic. Upon the floor. How well I recollect when I became quiet. What an unnatural stillness seemed to reign through the whole house. How well I remember when my smart and passion began to cool, how wicked I began to feel. I sat listening for a while, but there was not a sound. I crawled up from the floor. I saw my face in the glass, so swollen. Let's put that word up here. Swollen. Whoops. See if we can find a picture of swollen. Swollen is something that happens to you. Things become big because there's a problem. So here, this is a swollen foot. Here's a swollen eye. So the Mr. Murdstone beat Davy very bad, so his face was swollen. Okay, where did that word go? I crawled up from the floor and saw my face in the glass, so swollen and red and ugly that it almost frightened me. My stripes were sore and stiff. I don't know what he means by stripes. And made me cry afresh when I moved, but they were nothing to the guilt that I felt. Maybe the stripes. The stripe is like a long line. So if he was being hit with a cane, that would leave stripes. My stripes were sore and stiff, probably. And it almost frightened me. My stripes were sore and stiff and made me cry afresh when I moved, but they were nothing to the guilt I felt. It lay heavier on my breast than if I had been the most atrocious criminal, I dare say. It had begun to grow dark, and I had shut the window. I had been lying for the most part with my head upon the sill, by turns crying, dozing, looking listlessly out, when the key was turned and Miss Murdstone came in with some bread and meat and milk. These she put down on the table without a word, glaring at me, looking at me. And while the exemplary firmness, and with the exemplary firmness, and then retired, locking the door after her. Long after it was dark, I sat there wondering whether anybody would come. When this appeared improbable for that night, I undressed and went to bed. And there I began to weather fearfully what would be done to me. Whether it was a criminal act that I had committed, whether I should be taken into custody and sent to prison, whether I was at all in danger of being hanged. I never shall forget the waking the next morning and being cheerful and fresh for the first moment, and then being weighed down by the stale and dismal oppression of the remembrance. Miss Murdstone reappeared before I was out of bed, told me in so many words that I was free to walk in the garden for half an hour and no longer, and retired, and leaving the door open that I might avail myself of that permission. I did so, and did so every morning of my imprisonment, which lasted 5 days. If I could have seen my mother alone, I should have gone down on my knees to her and besought her forgiveness. But I saw no one. Miss Murdstone accepted. Miss Murdstone accepted during the whole time, except at evening prayers in the parlor, to which I was escorted by Miss Murdstone after everybody else was placed, where I was stationed, a young outlaw, like a criminal. An outlaw is like a criminal, all alone by myself near the door, and whence I was solemnly conducted by my jailer before anyone arose from the devotional posture. I only observed that my mother was as far off from me as she could be, and kept her face another way so that I never saw it, and that Mr. Murdstone's hand was bound up with a large linen wrapper. So bound up means like wrapped. So that's where Davy bit him. It was wrapped with some cloth. And the mother didn't talk to him and she wouldn't look at him. I think she wanted to, but maybe she wasn't allowed to. The length of those 5 days I can convey no idea to anyone. They occupy a place of years in my remembrance. The way in which I listened to all of the incidents of the house that made themselves audible to me, the ringing of the bells, the opening and shutting of doors, the murmuring of voices, the footsteps on the stairs, to any laughing, whistling, or singing outside, which seemed more dismal than anything else to me in my solitude. Dismal means like depressing, sad, scary. So all those sounds were not happy sounds. They kind of gave a scary sensation. The uncertain pace of the hours, especially at night when I would wake thinking it was morning and find that the family were not yet gone to bed, and that all the length of the night had yet to come, the depressed dreams and nightmares I had, the return of day, noon, afternoon, evening, when the boys played in the churchyard, and I watched them from a distance within the room, being ashamed to show myself at the window, lest they should know I was a prisoner. The strange sensation of never hearing myself speak, the fleeting intervals of something like cheerfulness which came with eating and drinking and went away with it, the setting of the rain one morning, with a fresh smell, and its coming down faster and faster between me and the church until it and gathering night seemed to quench me in gloom and fear and remorse. All this appears to have gone round the room for years instead of days, and it is so vividly and strongly stamped on my remembrance. On the last night of my restraint, I was awakened by hearing my own name spoken in a whisper. I started up in bed, and putting out my arms in the dark, said, "Is that you, Peggotty?" There was no immediate answer, but presently I heard my name again, in a tone so very mysterious and awful that I think I should have gone into a fit if it had not occurred to me that it must have come through a keyhole. I groped. Remember, that's when you can't see, so you feel around. I groped my way to the door and, putting my own lips to the keyhole, whispered, "Is that you, Peggotty dear?" "Yes, my own precious Davy," she replied. "Be as soft as a mouse, or the cat'll hear us." So be as soft, be as quiet as a mouse, or the cat, the Murdstones, will hear us. I understood this to mean Miss Murdstone, and was sensible of the urgency of the case, her room being close by. "How's Mamma, dear Peggotty? Is she very angry with me?" I could hear Peggotty crying softly on her side of the keyhole, as I was doing on mine before she answered, "No, not very." "What is going to be done with me, Peggotty dear? Do you know?" "School, near London," was Peggotty's answer. I was obliged to get her to repeat it, for she spoke it for the first time quite down my throat. So she spoke it for the first time. She spoke it the first time quite down my throat. I'm not sure what that means. In consequence of my having gotten to take my mouth. Oh, so his mouth was on the keyhole, and when she said it, he didn't hear it because his mouth was covering it, and it went into his mouth. So she had to repeat it. And though her words tickled me a good deal, I didn't hear them. So he's saying, although I was so happy to hear her voice, I didn't understand what she was saying. "When, Peggotty?" "Tomorrow." "Is that the reason why Miss Murdstone took the clothes out of my drawers, which she had done, though I have forgotten to mention it?" "Yes, yes," said Peggotty. "Box." I'm not sure why they say box. "Shan't I see Mama?" Okay, so maybe you've seen the word shall before. So this is a contraction of shall not. So shall I not see my mother? Will I not see my mother? Won't I see my mother? But here it's shan't. Shan't I see Mama? "Yes," said Peggotty. "Morning." Then Peggotty fitted her mouth close to the keyhole and delivered these words through it with as much feeling and earnestness as a keyhole has ever been the medium of communicating. I will venture to assert, shooting in each broken little sentence in a convulsive little burst of its own, "Davy dear, if I ain't been exactly as intimate with you lately as I used to be, it ain't because I don't love you just as well and more, my pretty puppet. It's because I thought it better for you, and for someone else besides. Davy, my darling, are you listening? Can you hear me?" "Yes, Peggotty," I sobbed. "My own," said Peggotty, with infinite compassion. "What I want to say is this, that you must never forget me, for I'll never forget you, and I'll take as much care of your Mamma, Davy, as ever I took care of you, and I won't leave her. The day may come when she'll be glad to lay her poor head on her stupid cross old Peggotty's arm again, and I'll write you, my dear, though I ain't no scholar, and I'll Peggotty fell to kissing the keyhole, and she couldn't kiss me. "Thank you, Peggotty dear. Thank you, dear Peggotty," said I. "Oh, thank you, thank you. Will you promise me one thing, Peggotty? Will you write and tell me, Mr. Peggotty and little Emily and Mrs. Gummidge and Ham, that I'm not so bad as they might suppose, and that I sent 'em all my love, especially little Emily? Will you, if you please, Peggotty?" The kind soul promised as we both of us kissed the keyhole with the greatest affection. I patted it with my hand. I recollect as if it had been her honest face, and parted. And from that night there grew up in my breast a feeling for Peggotty which I cannot very well define. She did not replace my mother, nobody could do that. But she came into a vacancy, an empty space, in my heart, which closed upon her. and I felt toward her something I had never felt for any other human being. It was a sort of comical affection, too, and yet if she had died, I cannot think what I should have done, or how I should have acted out of the tragedy it would have been to me. In the morning, Miss Murdstone appeared, as usual, and told me I was going to school, which was not altogether such news to me as she supposed. She also informed me that when I dressed, I was to come downstairs into the parlor and have my breakfast. There I found my mother, very pale, with red eyes, into whose arms I ran and begged her pardon for my suffering soul, from my suffering soul. "Oh, Davy," she said, "that you could hurt anyone I love. Try to be better, pray to be better. I forgive you, but I am not so grieved, Davy, that you should have such a bad passions in your heart." They had persuaded her that I was a wicked fellow, so the Murdstones had convinced the mother that Davy was bad and evil, and that she was more sorry for that than for my going away. So what made her feel bad was that her son was evil, not that he was going to school. I felt so sorely, I felt so bad about that. I tried to eat my parting breakfast, but my tears dropped upon my bread and butter and trickled into my tea, and I saw my mother look at me sometimes, and then glance at the watchful Miss Murdstone, and then look down or look away. "Master Copperfield's box there," said Miss Murdstone, when the wheels were heard at the gate. I looked for Peggotty, but it was not she. Neither she nor Mr. Murdstone appeared. My former acquaintance, the carrier, was at the door. The box was taken out to his cart and lifted in. "Clara," said Miss Murdstone in her warning note. "Ready, my dear Jane," returned my mother. "Goodbye, Davy. You're going for your own good. Goodbye, my child. You will come home in the holidays and be a better boy." "Clara," Miss Murdstone repeated. "Certainly, my dear Jane," replied my mother, who was holding me. "I forgive you, my dear boy. God bless you." "Clara!" Miss Murdstone repeated. Miss Murdstone was good enough to take me out to the cart and say on the way that she hoped I would repent. That means that she hoped I would feel bad about what I had done. Before I came to a bad end, before I turned into a bad adult, an evil adult. And then I got into the cart, and the lazy horse walked off with it. Okay, so that was chapter 4 of Daivd Copperfield by Chrales Dicken. Next time we shall do chapter 5. I'll see you then.